everybody, welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan. I'm joined by Kayla as always. Kayla, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Hanging out.
Nice. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. So we have a whole brand new lesson for you guys this month, and that is one that might ruffle some feathers, but it's a topic that we need to talk about and is important to teach because I feel like it's left out a lot of the conversations or it's just really thrown in people's faces without actually having a conversation about it. And that's cultural appropriation and closed practices and ethics on the witch's path. So, everybody who's ever been in a witchcraft space has probably heard the word cultural appropriation more times than they could probably count. They probably heard it at least once. Somebody got canceled for something or something else. The problem with that is canceling people because they're using a practice is one thing, but not educating them is worse. Just saying, hey, I'm not going to allow you to continue doing this or being in this space because of this. They may not know any better. A lot of times in witchcraft, we see there's a big thing where people like to say, oh, I read this in this book. Well, the book was from the 90s, and nobody really understood cultural appropriation because it was all just mismatched cultures thrown into new age practices, and nobody was separating where they came from or even acknowledging where they came from. And that was a problem. So
Right.
now we're going to talk about why it's important to talk about it and what it actually means. So, big question, what is cultural appropriation? If this is your first time hearing it, aren't you lucky? For us older witches, we're like, oh, again. um, but cultural appropriation is when someone outside of marginalized or minority culture is taking sacred practices, languages, symbols, teachings from that culture, often without really understanding the culture itself or without permission, and definitely without accountability, and using them for personal gain, spiritual excitement, aesthetic appeal, or just good vibes. And that the thing is that intention doesn't erase impact. So your intentions might be good. You might be, wanting to do that, not wanting to disrespect the culture, but still using the things like spirit animals, smudging, all of that, even in casual conversation, without really acknowledging where those terms come from or really talking about it in the terminology of that culture, just erases it for the people who have fought so hard to keep their culture. And it's a lot more than just a spiritual faux pas. It actually can be a repeat of harm and erasure and especially trauma for the people who actually fought to keep those traditions alive. So it's really not a whole thing of we talk about like who does it first or well so and so did it. It's the big thing is having cultural appropriation. It's about power. And it's about using the privilege to pick up a ritual or a word or a symbol because you think it's cool, and it actually ends up being a practice that may have been punished, ostracized, or the people who tried to fight to keep it may have even been killed for it. And so when a community, especially a marginalized community, says, hey, this is sacred, this isn't for everyone, it's not gatekeeping, it's survival. They are trying to keep their traditions alive and for their people and the descendants of their people. It's not for everybody. And that's not gatekeeping in any capacity. Gatekeeping is a whole other topic. In fact, we have a whole podcast about it. Go listen to that episode. um, but it's about making sure that the terminology where it's being learned is appropriate.
So some spiritual doors are open. Um Inviting people with sincere hearts, with curiosity to come in and learn that's okay. Closed practices exist for a reason. Others are closed And other doors are closed, and that is not about being exclusionary or elitist. Many practices survived colonization, genocide, forced conversions, and centuries of active erasure. Some were driven underground for generations, their rituals held in secret and passed on in whispers, because practicing openly would get you jailed, shamed, or worse. So, for these communities, their practices are a living shield. They are a way of preserving the heart of their culture. Um, and power against a world that tried to wipe them out. So realize that these words aren't just words for certain cultures. And if you haven't been initiated, trained, or invited into those traditions by someone who is a living carrier of that culture, you're not entitled to those words. You're not entitled to those teachings, no matter how strong your vibes, your dreams, your past life memories, whatever those things that you feel drawn to them are, you're not entitled to them. It's not about being told no for the sake of it. It's not about that. It's about understanding that spiritual work is built on the lived history. It's about, imagine someone has walked into your sacred space and they're performing your family's rituals for TikTok clout or for a magazine aesthetics. And that's what it feels like for people from these marginalized cultures every time their sacred words and sacred actions are taken for someone else's self care Sunday or, you know,
or
hot
whatever.
yoga, hot yoga, or whatever it is, you know? So realize that realize that those words have much deeper roots underneath them, that have much deeper meanings that go much further than just a word.
Right. And the big thing about that too is when we, especially people who've been practicing a long time, if you've been practicing from early 2000s, like, all the way through the 80s or 90s or whatever, you've got a lot of unlearning to do because we were all taught the same stuff that everything was open, it was fine, spirituality's for the world. And then when you really start listening to the people and the people and the cultures who literally started saying, no, it's really not. You're actually stepping all over my stuff and it's kind of rude. You have to go through a process of unlearning. And unlearning is not punishment. We unlearn stuff every day. You know, we learn something that was true back in the day, and science has changed it. It's made it different. We've grown.
Hey, Pluto has been learned and unlearned and relearned.
Yeah, I was gonna say Pluto's been a planet, not a planet, then a planet, not a planet, somewhere in between all of that. Well, poor
I don't know
Pluto.
what Pluto
I
is
don't
now. Poor
either.
Pluto.
Poor Pluto. um, but the sacred act of devotion, especially a step towards humility and a sign that your spiritual path is alive, isn't just a collection of habits you picked up from a Witchcraft for Beginners book, X, Y, and Z book here. It's some of those books back then give problematic language and appropriated rituals without any context, and even from teachers that we trusted. And sometimes the books that were best selling for a reason, sometimes the chaos, sometimes those books are best selling for a reason, and sometimes the chaos from the internet makes all of them even more popular. But learning all of this from those sources doesn't make you a villain. It just means that you were taught wrong. And now, the cool thing is you get to do it better. You get to learn from cultures, you get to learn about them. And learning about cultures from the sources of those cultures and learning about them, that's not appropriation. That's appreciation. There's a difference. And we're going to talk about that later. But the process of letting go of appropriated terms or practices isn't really about erasing your magic or stripping you of power. It's about making room for practice that's honest and ethical and real. Unlearning old languages and habits, especially as witches as we grow, like I remember when I first got into witchcraft, everybody was like, you have to smudge. It's the only way you can cleanse. So, yeah. And you can only smudge with white sage. That was huge back then. And so
Yeah.
everybody and their dog probably ended up with some white sage smudging stick from somewhere. And they had to smudge their house, otherwise, the demons and everything else were going to get them. The problem is, smudging with white sage is cultural appropriation. Smudging
Mhm.
belongs to indigenous cultures. Smudging, and especially white sage, belong to indigenous cultures. It's not appropriate for everybody. And here's the cool thing: you can cleanse your home with smoke cleanses without using white sage. Because the cool thing, the
Yeah.
difference between white sage and, green sage, like you get from the grocery store? One's white and one's green. That's it. There's no special thing. It was made special because it belonged to another culture. And that's the problem. It belonged to the other culture and it was sacred to them because those cultures grew it specifically for that. And it wasn't appropriate for everybody to use. So when you leave words like smudging, spirit animal, karma, mantra, chakra, and all of those things behind, you're not leaving them behind because you're losing magic. You're leaving them behind because you understand the weight of the words and the cultures that that you have dug into and stepped deeper into and understood why those words are meaningful to those cultures. And so every time you're replacing one of those culturally appropriated terms or practices with something that is more yours, you're actually rooting your practice well into integrity and making it far more ethical. And it's way, way better than some trendy spell hashtag witch talk video, insert Instagram altar here, any of those things, because it's yours and it's yours specifically. And so you are learning things within appropriate cultures that you are allowed to use that are open without demeaning your own practice by taking it from a practice that doesn't belong to you. It's kind of
Yeah.
like you wouldn't want somebody to come in and start rearranging all of your stuff and being like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm going to take it and put it on my altar." And you're like, "Hey, wait a minute. That was mine." It's the same kind of concept. It belonged to you. It was yours. You didn't want to share that because it wasn't somebody else's and it wasn't meant to be shared. It was meant to be yours. So we don't want to do that to other cultures too, with their practices, their stuff, and all of their things. Because that's not really fair to them either.
So let's address the biggest, well, one of the biggest elephants in the room, that is bloodlines. And a lot of people are doing the DNA results and wanting to know their history of their DNA and wanting to know who they are genetically. So let's step into that. Just because you have, you know, however much percentage of something on your genetic pie chart doesn't give you the spiritual authority or a free pass to go into a closed practice. Here's the thing: ancestry is beautiful, but a bloodline alone is not a golden ticket into that into that genetic thing, into that closed practice. A DNA result can spark curiosity or a desire to connect, but it doesn't make you an insider to a culture that you were not raised in. A living tradition means breathing its values, speaking its language, honoring its rituals, being shaped by the joys and the traumas of its community. If you haven't lived that experience, you are still on the outside. And that's not shameful, doesn't, but it does mean that you don't get to claim sacred knowledge or step into roles reserved for those who carry the full weight of that tradition. I exhibit this myself. I have multiple ancestry results that give me connections to indigenous peoples, peoples that are in the Americas, peoples that are in Australia, people that are in Europe. I have multiples in my ancestry DNA. Does that give me the right to automatically assume all of their traditions? No, absolutely not. Because I wasn't raised in any of those traditions. I wasn't raised with any of that knowledge. Could I have the approach as a guest to go approach those traditions and ask, could I learn? Sure. But if I was told no, absolutely not would I impose. Absolutely not. I would not impose myself. But I would not be an inheritor of those traditions. Let the living tradition bearers teach you if they choose. Understand that some knowledge is not yours, even if your DNA says so, even if you have your great great whoever's ghost whispering in your ear. Honoring your ancestry means honoring boundaries. Dive into your history. Cook the ancestral food, learn the songs and stories, but just don't demand the keys to rituals that you were not taught to hold. You can learn everything that you want to learn on the outside as a guest, but know where that threshold is, know where that line is that you are a guest and you cannot step over that threshold because that threshold is the difference of I was not raised in this and the difference of I was raised in this and I know the struggles and the difference of being raised of the traumas of this ancestry and the traumas of this life or the culture of this life, the culture of knowing all of my family that were raised in this. There's a difference. And the culture of all of the traditions and the rituals, there's a difference. Know where that threshold lies and be a guest until you are offered the chance to be more than a guest. And if that chance never arises, be happy being a guest.
The you know, your DNA also has a lot of, indigenous stuff. Mine does too.
Mhm.
Mine has
Yeah.
DNA from indigenous cultures from the Middle East all the way through, Central America and even other parts of the Americas as well, and big chunks of Europe as well as, even Africa. And
Yeah.
so, am I privileged to any of those cultures? Oh God, no.
No.
um, I mean, having the ancestry and the DNA and, the genetics and all of that stuff, sure, that's really fascinating. And it's really cool to understand that and see that perspective and know where, you come from, basically. But you're not part of those cultures. And
Yeah.
as much as I'm like, yes, I know that, my half Latina side is over here like, yes, you have all the DNA to match this, as well as this because of your, father. But also at the same time, you're like, so I don't know if I am privileged to the indigenous side of that because I don't know.
Right.
And so I would never go and presume that I was just because of that heritage and, my ancestry and everything else. That's not something that is able for me to say, yes, this is exactly who I am. I don't know. So I would never pursue that. Do I want to learn about it? Yeah, absolutely. I learn about all cultures, not to practice them, but to appreciate them because I want to know who they are and I want to remember their stories and maybe even teach their stories to other people. Not because I am somebody who should be practicing. No, I think it's really fascinating to learn about the cultures and mythologies, especially of all of these places, places that may also
Yes.
have been lost to time. So
Yes.
that's important. Now, here's one that everybody has heard of at least 1,000 times, probably in your lifetime.
Yes.
Karma. Karma and energy
Mhm.
work and why those words matter is a very big topic. So, karma is probably the most misunderstood and misused word in the Western spiritual landscape. If you've ever
Yes.
spent any time, and you're obviously listening to this podcast, I probably have even used the word karma in the past. But in recent years, I have learned that that's actually not appropriate for people to use. It belongs to specific cultures and specific philosophies and specific religions. I didn't know this because I am a product of the late 90s, early 2000s where it was in every single book at least once.
Mhm.
And it's still printed in books today because
Yeah.
it's not widely talked about. And a lot of times, even when peoples of a specific culture are saying, hey, we would really like you not to use that, they get overshadowed because people don't want to give up the convenience of using those practices, those terms, or any of those beliefs. They don't want to search for one that is more appropriate because that's inconvenient. And that's the sad reality. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. A lot of times we don't want to do things because it's inconvenient. And so, understanding a little bit about where some of these terminologies come from, like where does karma actually come from? Well, I didn't know until I started looking into it. I actually read an article about it where basically the people of India were saying, hey, please don't use this terminology in just everyday culture because it actually means something to us. And I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean? Where does it come from?
Mhm.
And so, what we didn't know and should have known is that karma, specifically the concept of karma, actually originated in ancient India and is one of the biggest cornerstones and is part of several major religions and philosophical societies and systems, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. And it's a Sanskrit word which literally means action or deed. And in traditions, karma is often referred to in a spiritual practice of cause and effect. We all know that if You do good in the world, you get good karma back. If you do bad in the world, you get bad karma back. That's how it's kind of supposed to work. But karma isn't about immediate payback or, a single lifetime's moral scorecard. And that's another thing that ends up making it really difficult to kind of understand karma, is because it also becomes a place of judging in modern spirituality of, oh, you're going to get bad karma for that. It's like, well, excuse you. um
Mhm.
so,
And
and
that's not what it is about.
no, it's really not. Like in Hinduism, karma is inseparable from the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, which is the samsara. And actions that, you do in this lifetime can affect future incarnations. And it's very heavily intertwined with all sorts of things like dharma, and we also see this a lot in Buddhism too. It kind of, a lot of these kind of overlap. So if you're like, wait, I know this from Buddhism, some of them overlap. It's not just because one is exclusive to that terminology and all that. A lot of these systems actually overlapped over time, and we see them
Mhm.
doing that. So when you're like, oh, but that's from Hinduism, it's also from Buddhism, it's also from Jainism, it's also from Sikhism, but it all means something a little bit different within those ones. So don't be like, well, if it's in Hinduism, why do the Buddhists use it? Because it overlaps. And it's all part of that very large, broad stroke of peoples who practiced a lot of those religions and spiritualities across a very broad thing. I'm actually in the process of learning about all the different types of Buddhism. So I'm actually seeing how far a lot of this actually spread. And it's really fascinating. I can nerd out on that, but that's not why we're here today. So that's a whole other topic. Come join pagans nerding out thing. Um, but yes, it's in Buddhism, which basically talks about, again, it shapes your future circumstances and so on. And especially in Buddhism, you want the focus of breaking those cycles of suffering so that way you can kind of achieve nirvana. So it's not just about having good karma, it's about the spirituality as well. In Jainism, we actually see it also as a part of kind of a physical substance that ends up binding the soul to certain cycles of life and death and so on. And then it really kind of gets a little bit different, especially in Sikhism, where it's recognized, but it's the grace of the divine, not just karma alone, that brings the liberation of the soul. So it overlaps, but where it really overlaps is those are not things that are really even open to the public. And for anyone
Mm-mm.
who's out there, but they're like, but I practice Buddhism. You probably practice an open form of Buddhism. There's several open forms, but there's also several forms that are actually closed practice. Why is it kind of problematic in modern witchcraft? Well, because again, that goes back to that whole I'm going to judge you for it. It becomes this cosmic judgment. They flatten the concept, and really they flatten it because it's something that it's more of a catchphrase than a deep religious idea. And by doing that, it strips the word of its spiritual accountability and the roots of its system that are deeply woven through philosophy and ritual, culture, and ethics into something of instant karma memes and wishful thinking. And that's something that ends up creating almost a erasure, because ignoring it, especially in the fact that these religions still exist with living practitioners and sacred traditions that still are practiced today, and these communities have openly asked for others to stop using this terminology, then you end up getting this very flattened thing, and it causes basically this friction that is saying that if you continue to use it and you're continuing to say, well, everybody else does, so why can't I? You're basically participating in a grand erasure of those practices, even though they are still practiced. They're not as dominant in some places as other religions or even other pagan practices. So, understanding that is, we have to make sure that we appreciate all of the peoples and all of their practices. Because without doing that, it ends up creating this terrible system. And we don't want to flatten terminologies. We don't want to flatten even religious systems. And we also don't want to flatten even deity. And that's a whole other topic as well. But anyway, I digress. So we want to make sure that we are keeping the ongoing teachings of those cultures very much alive in their truest form with the people who are rightfully supposed to be practicing them.
So, what can we do instead? Instead of using karma, you can talk about cause and effect, consequence, or energetic resonance. You can say actions have consequences, or what I put out comes back in some way, without erasing centuries of lived religious tradition. If you want a term for spiritual momentum, use your own language or draw from open framework.
I I also want to quickly interject here. I forgot to mention one of the terms that's also associated with karma, and that's chakras. They come from the same systems. So just
Yes.
both. Both are important. I forgot to mention that. So now back to Kayla.
And if karma and chakra are off the table, what do you call the flows, centers, and cycles of energy in your own magical practice? Um, the good news, witchcraft and Western esoteric traditions have plenty of open models that are both powerful and rooted. So there's the three cauldrons. It's from the Celtic and the fairy traditions, and it's composed of three energy centers: the cauldron of warming, the cauldron of motion, and the cauldron of wisdom. So the cauldron of warming is the belly, survival, and vitality. The cauldron of motion is the chest. It's got motion and creativity. And the cauldron of wisdom is the head, intuition, and spiritual vision. So these cauldrons aren't just symbolic, they're used in meditation, healing, and ritual to balance the self and direct energy in healthy ways. The next one is the world tree. It's Norse, Celtic, and other Indo European traditions. The world tree is the axis that links to the underworld, the middle world, or the earth, and the upper world, which is heaven or the other world. It's a map of spiritual reality you can use for energy work and journeying, and it's wide open to creative exploration. The next one you can use is the four elements. We see this a lot: earth, air, fire, water, and it's one of the oldest open energy frameworks in the West. Each element associated with aspects of self, ritual, and nature. They're found everywhere from ancient Greece to Renaissance magic to modern Wicca. You see this one everywhere, and it is completely open. You can also use the subtle bodies. So this one is Western esotericism. Think Hermeticism, Theosophy, Golden Dawn. They have talked about the astral body, the etheric body, and more for centuries. These models are flexible and open. Just be careful not to slide into appropriating closed Eastern systems, such as Indian or Chinese energy bodies. So those are the subtle bodies. And when you talk about energy, don't be afraid to use plain language too. Describe what you actually feel. My energy feels blocked in my chest. That's simple. I need to replenish my core, or I'm working to ground myself. Magic doesn't need exotic labels to be powerful. It just needs to be real. You just need simple language does the same job as some fancy word.
Mhm.
It's the exact same thing.
And, talking about simple language, language matters. I mean, th there's whole studies of language and why it's important. We teach about it in, different, avenues of different, lessons and subjects, but language matters, especially if it's misused, overused, or even harmful. Um, and a lot of times it becomes that way because nobody stops to look where the words come from. And so they're just like, "Oh, well, this is where the word is, so that's what it means." And, everybody is saying it, so it must be okay. Not usually. Sometimes somebody says it and it just picks up. It's kind of like lighting a match in dry grass. Eventually, it spreads like wildfire and can end up causing damage that was not intended. So, we have to really think about like examining the everyday spiritual language that we've been taught to use unquestioningly to make sure that we are actually using the terms correctly and making sure that we are really not misusing, misinterpreting, flattening something that was never meant to be like that. Um, so this isn't about policing speech, FYI. It's about making sure that it's, precise, respectful, it has clarity, and all the things that we should definitely be valuing, especially in an ethical practice. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but spirit animal or even the word totem. Yeah, those everyone has probably heard at least once of saying, my spirit animal. Well, that word actually originates in specific indigenous and North American cultures, especially the indigenous North American cultures, um, where the relationships with spirit animals or clan animals or totems are deeply embedded in their cultural and spiritual and communal structures. That's not something that we're open to, and that's not something that is appropriate for everybody to be using in normal spiritual or even everyday conversation, because a lot of those are actually tied to lineage and ceremony, and there's even a responsibility for having the understanding of where those animals come from in places of those people and how they continue to work throughout history. Using spirit animal, especially casually, really strips the meaning of the indigenous spirituality. It ends up just kind of being this costume that everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I have a spirit animal." Hey, I'm guilty of it too. I grew up in the same, I read all the early books and everybody said it too. But when you really start looking at where the language comes from, then you start going, "Oh,
Oh.
well, about that."
And it's not a happy "oh."
No, it's
It's
never a
not a
happy
happy
"oh."
"oh." It's
It's
a
a, "Oh,
"oh."
oops, my bad. Let me not do that again." Um
Yeah.
Like, so here's a really great thing that you can do instead of saying spirit animal. Even animal guide starts to get a little bit kind of borderline. It can be used, but it can still be a little bit borderline. Symbolic
Yeah.
animal is also a little bit borderline. You can say like animal ally, that's usually okay. But honestly, just speak plainly. Like, we have this need to have fancy terminology for things that we can just say commonly. Like, if you have a strong affinity with crows or a strong connection to birds or hawks, say that. You don't have to say spirit animal, spirit guide, animal guide, any of those kinds of things. Or say, like, wolves feel very important to my practice, so I work with a lot of wolf imagery in my practice. The clear language does not weaken it, it makes it honest. Too often we have been taught that we have to have really big, fancy language to make magic work. As you have learned on my show, that sometimes that does not always work. And sometimes, if I'm doing something as simple as like cleansing, I will literally turn on very loud music and say, if you're not supposed to be here, get the fuck out of my house. It works just as well as some fancy language. In fact, I think it works better because it's more connected to how you normally would speak. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be respectful. You should, but at the same time, plain language still has a place in magic. And I think we often try to forget that and think that it has to be like poetry or prose or something super fancy. It doesn't. That can make it better if that's how you feel, sure. And you want to spend the time creating that, great, do that. But that doesn't mean you have to, especially if you're somebody that's like, I don't have, all this time to go make this fancy thing. Then say it plainly. It's just that simple. Now, here's one that, y'all might come for me for, but I'm going to tell you exactly how it is. The word empath is not one that should actually be used, really. Empath is
No.
not an old spiritual term at all. It's really not.
No.
It's not ancient, it's not mystical. It did not originate in witchcraft. It originated actually in mid 20th century science fiction and psychology adjacent writings, and then later was absorbed into New Age culture. And it became shorthand for especially somebody who feels emotions very strongly or notices emotional shifts. And the problem here is not the sensitivity. Sensitivity is very real and very valuable. The problem is how empath is often used to especially override and avoid responsibility and boundaries. It becomes a way to blame others for your own emotional state of saying, oh, I picked up your energy. That's why I'm being a bitch. Like, no, you're being a bitch because you're choosing to be a bitch. Just own it. Or worse, it justifies intruding on someone else's emotional space of saying, I'm an empath. I know how to fix you. I am somebody who also reads people very well. Turns out that that was not being an empath. That was actually trauma, but that's a whole other topic. Um, but I called myself an empath because that was the terminology that matched. And it wasn't because I was wrong. Like, my trauma actually makes it to where I can read people's emotional awareness pretty easily. But at the same
Mhm.
time, it wasn't mystical, it wasn't magical. I didn't have some superpower. That's not who I was. That wasn't any of those things. And yeah, and because I didn't know better, I still used that terminology and used it incorrectly. The things I learned in the early 90s and 2000s, the more I go through this lesson, the more I'm like, oh, so sorry. I didn't know any better. And most of us who were raised in those or raised, who practiced back then didn't know any better either. And that's not really it's not really our fault, but we should own it at the same time because we weren't taught a better way. Now, here's the thing. In ethical
Right.
practice, emotional awareness doesn't grant you access to anybody else's lives. If you are a sensitive person and you understand sensitivity from a mystical perspective, which is real, by the way, that requires boundaries and does not give you entitlement. You are not entitled to someone else's emotions. You are not entitled to their spiritual space. You are not even entitled to use that sensitivity to encroach on other spiritual beings' space. That also requires consent across the board. More accurately, understanding the emotional sensitive language or highly perceptive or being intuitive or even trauma aware, like I was saying, these terms actually help you understand that practice way better, but they also give you the ability to have the responsibility to not bypass consent or turn it into a spiritual identity, which is exactly what, unfortunately, a lot of people who, including myself back in the day, who have used the word empath have done because that's how we were taught. And that's not okay. Consent matters. In witchcraft, especially, in spiritual practice, especially, consent matters. We don't give consent to entities that come in and want to wreck our shit. Why should we allow somebody who is well meaning? That's not the same thing. Well, it is the same thing. You wouldn't allow something that is negative to come into your space, but you also shouldn't just allow anybody into your space, and you shouldn't be encroaching on other people's space because you have good intent.
Now, the next one is gonna ruffle some feathers. Maybe not as much, but it'll still ruffle some feathers. It's smudging. Smudging is not a generic word, and it's not a generic word for smoke cleansing. It is a specific ceremonial practice found in certain indigenous nations and with certain ceremonies involved, specific plants, specific prayers, protocols, and cultural context. Smudging is very specific. And I know you've seen TV shows with the abalone shell and the feather and all of that. Just because you see it on TV does not mean you should do it.
The funny thing about the abalone shell is that smudging originated with most of the plains peoples. There's no abalone shells in the plains. It's landlocked.
No.
That's why it's funny to me. Okay, carry on.
Yes, it's not. You should not do that. So, commonly associated with smudging is white sage, and it is sacred in these traditions and has been severely overharvested due to commercial demand, due to people that are not indigenous and people that are not of the indigenous nations wanting white sage. So, using the word smudging to describe burning herbs for cleansing erodes the practice's ceremonial weight, and it contributes to environmental and cultural harm. Now, if you're burning herbs for cleansing, just say what you're doing. You're smoke cleansing, you're herbal cleansing, or you're burning rosemary for purification. All of those are accurate and respectful alternatives. Naming the plant that you're burning and the intention that you're burning it for, it keeps your practice grounded and it avoids appropriating the sacred language. You're not smudging because you're not using the specific plants, the specific prayers and protocols and cultural context. But if you name whatever herb you are using, whatever thing you are cleansing for, if you're burning rosemary for purification, say you're burning rosemary for purification. If you're burning a different herb to, I don't know, get the wiggles out of your house because your kids are acting up. Maybe your kids are acting up and you want to get all the wiggles out of your house and it's nap time.
Begone thy
I
demons of
don't
wiggles.
know. I don't know what you burn herbs for. Maybe you burn herbs for that.
Oh my lord, that's
But
great.
hey, if that's what you do your cleansing for, more power to you. Say that's what you're doing. It doesn't make it any less powerful because you're not calling it smudging. It doesn't make it any less good. It doesn't make it any better to call it smudging, is what I'm saying. So the next one is shaman or shamanism. This one gets a little tricky. The word shaman comes from the Tungusic people of Siberia, Mongolia, and northeast China, and refers to a specific cultural and spiritual role within those societies. And over time, Western spirituality flattened the term into a catch all label for anyone who works with spirits, healing, or trance states. Now, this erasure is harmful because it removes the word from its cultural roots. and applies it broadly to practices that are not connected to the lineage at all. It reinforces colonial habit of renaming non-Western spiritual leaders through an outsider's lens. So instead of using shaman, describe what you actually do. You're a spirit worker, or a trance worker, or a medium, or you're a healer or practitioner. Those are all clearer, more accurate, more precise, and precision respects both your work and the cultures that the original term belongs to, because that's what it is. The original term belongs to the culture that it came from.
Yes, it really does. And we also see, shamanism and those types of things, even in open practices like Norse mythology. But Norse mythology, we don't really know if shamanism was actually part of the culture. We do know that practices like Seder actually do have trance work and spirit work and, divination and those types of things, even healing in those aspects. But they weren't technically shamans. And so there's a lot of confusion of whether or not the Norse may have gone to places um like Mongolia and China or any of those other places, because the Norse did travel all over the place. Um they went a Viking. That was actually their job. Um and so we don't actually know whether or not they may have actually picked up that terminology and brought it back, or if it's
Right.
been applied from a Western perspective. We don't actually really know. It's very confused, and there's a lot of people be like, oh, well, it's part of that practice. Nobody really knows historically. So
So
it's best to just
it's
kind of
better to
avoid
be
it.
precise.
Yeah. And you can say that you're a practitioner of Seder. That works too, because it involves some of the similar practices, if that's what you actually practice, if you actually practice it from a Norse lens. But if you're practicing it from, like, an Egyptian lens, the Egyptians did not practice Seder. So don't use it that way.
No,
That would also be cultural
no.
appropriation, even though both are open. Um, and that kind of perspective leads us into another one that we see all over the internet, and that's third
All
eye.
over.
Everyone's and their dog has probably said third eye at least once in their entire life. And, you might be like, oh, but, is that really cultural appropriation? It actually originated from Hindu and Buddhist traditions. So it wasn't something that was really big in other cultures. And it obviously, like many of the other things from, back in the world religion is open to everyone phase, it really spread deep into the Western spirituality, because for some reason Western spirituality really, like, latched onto Hindu and Buddhist traditions and was like, yes, I want all of this. I don't know why we did that, but we did for some reason.
I
And
don't know.
it spread very deeply in a lot of pagan practices and new age spiritual practices, and really kind of got muddied down into what it actually kind of isn't. The term casually is supposed to describe intuition, psychic awareness, a sensation in the middle of your forehead. And what that term actually means, and confusing it with its own cultural context, contributes to the same pattern of borrowing of sacred language for convenience. And truthfully, this is so easy to fix. Instead of trying to say, oh, my third eye is active, or it's buzzing, or I feel this in my third eye and it feels like it's on fire, just basically say my intuition is heightened, or I'm getting a headache, like, it's something is happening psychically that I am feeling in my body, wherever you're feeling it. But instead of saying my third eye is buzzing, um, there's lots of other ways we can just change that language, and should change that language. So, kind of bridging from there into another one that I'm sure you've probably seen, and for some reason it all, like, bleeds into each other, and that's law of attraction. And this one is not super appropriative in the same cultural senses, but it's often misused and very oversimplified. So it's not that it's really bad to use. It's just it really takes away from marginalized communities, and not just marginalized in a cultural perspective, but it takes away um the understanding of how our cultures treat people who are, dealing with inequality, disability, trauma, or even systemic barriers, because of the fact that it's like, well, if you just put out there that you want this, you're going to fix your whole life. Well, ma'am, I've been putting this out there for a long time and it doesn't seem to work. Now, that's not to say that I haven't gotten some of the stuff, but law of attraction is one of those things that ends up kind of becoming toxic, because it's like you're not
Yes.
attracting enough, you're not doing enough, you're just failing at life. No, you're not. You're human. You're doing your very best in a world, and especially a system, that is not built to help normal people. So saying law of attraction is like trying to say, "Oh, here, come use law of attraction and pay $5,000 for this course for me to tell you that you're basically fucking up your life." No. No, please don't do that either. Save your money.
Yes.
Because a lot of times we end up with this whole thing of, you must manifest to the stars that you're going to do this. Manifestation has its place, don't come for me. It does. But it's not going to just replace the actions you also have to put with it. If you're just saying, I'm manifesting being a millionaire tomorrow, well, nobody's going to show up on your doorstep with $1 million check. I mean, they might, but not likely. And if you're over here like, I want to be a millionaire, okay, well, then work towards a
Put
career
in the
to help
footwork
you.
for it.
If you're somebody that's like, oh, I would like a better house, put in the footwork to save for it. Do that. Do something that allows you to actually have that back there. And, we always say you can't just go and do a spell for like a new job. If you're not putting in the job applications, it's not going to work. So you have to put in the footwork behind it. And law of attraction erases that footwork. It just says manifest it, just do it. It's going to happen. And it becomes really toxic. And I have had people who have used law of attraction to basically tell me I could get rid of my MS through it. That's what I'm talking about when
Which
it
is
comes.
insanity.
It's insanity. It really is. But that's where, it becomes toxic to people with disabilities or inequality or even trauma. Just be more positive. You're going to be fine. No, 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 Karen, stop it. That's not how that
Sorry
works.
to all the Karens.
Sorry to whoever's named Karen. You're probably not the problem, but generic bad Karen. That's what we're referring to. So, in we don't want to do that. And which honestly, that also bleeds into probably our next topic, which is shadow work. Because if you're over here telling everyone to fix their life with law of attraction, like, are you good? Why is
Are
everybody
you
else's
okay?
why is everyone else's problems your problem? Like, are you okay? What's going on behind the shadows there, huh? Are you okay? Shadow work is not something that is culturally appropriate. It is not a universal ancient spiritual practice, but that's how it's presented. It's actually where it originates is in the psychological works of Carl Jung. That's where it comes from. It actually refers to the exploration of parts of ourselves that we often repress, deny, or avoid. So, no, it's not inappropriate. It is open, widely used. The only reason it's even in this list is because often it is framed as something that is mystical or ancient or timeless, and it's not. It came out of Carl Jung's work, which I highly recommend reading if that's something that you're into. Um, but it's based in psychology. And yes, you can have
Mhm.
spiritual practices to go with it. We've often talked about on the show that, witchcraft is just spicy psychology. Yes, it is. You can still have a spiritual practice alongside psychological work. It is not a replacement for therapy. Still see your therapist, please. Okay? If you
Yeah.
actually need psychological help, please see your therapist or counselor or whoever. It is not a replacement. It is an aid to go alongside it and benefit it. Benefit the work you're already doing. Doing the footwork, like we already said. So, no, you can still use this terminology. Just make sure you're using it appropriately and not saying that it comes out of like ancient Greece or some shit like that.
Yes.
So, yeah,
So the next term that we've got to look at is one that gripes my nerves.
sames.
It is the word it is the word gypsy or gypsy magic. Gypsy is and always will be a slur historically. It is applied to the Romani people and it is inseparable from stereotypes, persecution, and cultural harm. Any of the word in spiritual or magical context perpetuates that harm, even when used romantically or nostalgically. Gypsy is a slur. There's no ethical alternative phrasing that keeps the term intact. Just remove it entirely. If you mean to say folk magic, say folk magic. If you mean fortune telling, say that, but never attach it to a slur. Take that word out of your context.
Yes, take that out of your context. Also, folk magic is much broader than the Romani people. Folk magic comes from every
Yes,
culture. And,
yes, there
that's
is
something that
folk
we will
magic
teach about
every
later,
culture.
but just for the record, it comes out from far beyond that. So, even to associate that word with folk magic is still flattening a folk magic because it comes from every culture. It's from the folk,
Yeah.
the people, and it ranges from all of the different worlds and all the different peoples.
The next one is voodoo, hoodoo, and witch doctor. So, witch doctor is a colonial term that dismisses and caricatures non Western spiritual healers, and it should not be used. So, that one, ex nay on the witch doctor. Voodoo, which is misnamed voodoo, so you'll have to see the spellings.
It's
VODOU
often
is voodoo.
pronounced vodou or voodoo, and there's a heavier,
Yes,
it's not voodoo. It's
voodoo.
not like, yeah, there's a U in the N and a couple of less O's. But
Yeah.
Vodou is also how it's pronounced as well. So
And it is a closed religion with specific initiations, lineages, and living community. Now, hoodoo is not the same as vodou. It is a folk magic tradition rooted in Black American history and survival. Some aspects are considered open, but it requires serious respect, serious study, and acknowledgement of its cultural root. It is not interchangeable with generic spell work. For this, if you are not part of these traditions or have not been taught directly, do not use the names casually. Use accurate descriptors like, again, folk magic, but that folk magic is still a very shortened term for a broader subject. Root work, and you use root work only when appropriate, or a healing practice, and name traditions only when you are connected to them properly. So, this one is one where if you have not been acknowledged in these cultures, you do not use them. So make sure that you are using these appropriately.
which really kind of brings us into the appreciation versus appropriation. Because here's the thing, you can have a conversation about voodoo, you can have a conversation about hoodoo, You can have a
Yes.
conversation about the history of the Romani people and talking about gypsy as a slur and how it was used against them in a conversation. You should not be using them in spiritual practices or magical
No.
contexts in that regard. What you should
No.
do is understand the difference between appropriation and appreciation. So here's the thing, appreciation is something that we do all the time. We appreciate cultures, we appreciate practices, and that's about learning about them. Like I said earlier, I'm learning all about Buddhism because I didn't know as much as I wanted to. Do I have any intent on practicing it? No. But I would like to be able to at least carry on a conversation and not sound like I'm a crazy person. so um I wanted to learn about it. But in learning about it, that also honors the people and the cultures that it came from. And it helps uplift them because you have the respect and the curiosity. Now, consent is one of those things of if you're learning something that is very close practice and there are no written books about it and you basically go to a person and say, hey, I would like to learn about this, you have to have their consent. You have to possibly even have the consent of their entire community to learn about it,
Mhm.
and you show up as a guest. It's listening, supporting, giving credit, building a relationship with those people to understand their culture's terms. Now, where does appropriation fit in this? That is when you take that knowledge that you have learned and you start to use those sacred practices, those symbols or languages without context or for personal gain, aesthetic purposes, without permission or understanding. And so appreciation really ends up asking, how can I witness and celebrate and support you as a culture and as a person who's in that culture? Appropriation asks, how can I use this in my practice for myself? There is a difference in those relationships with those words. If you are truly appreciating something, especially something within those cultures, you can usually see how those people will feel seen and respected. They're not erased, they're not exploited. You're not turning it into a costume. You're not trying to make it into something that it's not. You're wanting to see it from its own perspective, from the perspective it's meant to be learned from, whether that be from a historical perspective or even a modern day practice of how it's transitioned from history to modern day. That is appreciation. Now, we always have to ask ourselves, am I honoring the culture or am I making this culture about me? Am I centering myself in this culture? And if you are keeping your practice honest and rooted in true respect, you can appreciate and honor a culture without practicing it. You can appreciate and learn about it. I have learned a lot about Vodou and I've learned a lot about indigenous practices. I've learned a lot about Buddhism and other aspects, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go practice them. I was just simply curious from an academic perspective. I wanted to learn about them. And I've sat down and had conversations with people who practice those traditions and said, well, this is what a book says. Tell me your story. Tell me the difference. And that's not because I want to practice, it's because I genuinely want to know the people behind their own stories, behind the stories written in a book, and understand who and how it's practiced. Not because I want to, but because I want to understand the people. And when you get past the whole thing of, oh, well, I want to do this because it looks cool. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that looks cool that, I would like to do. I'm not going to go do that. That's not me. And that shouldn't be you either. Your practice can still be extra cool without practicing something that's edgy or that's forbidden. And understanding that language is how your practice will also take shape. Understanding how language works within your practice really allows it to be rooted in ethics and responsibility. Because when we borrow our words carelessly, we're also borrowing the harm that was attached to them. But when we actually research and listen and slow down and choose better language, we're building magic that isn't hollow. It's connected to us because we're making choices about it. Ethical practice is not restriction, it's integrity. And you don't lose your power I hate when people say that. You don't lose your power by choosing respectful words. You actually gain clarity and depth and sovereignty. And that's so much better. And that's the kind of magic that's worth practicing. And that's the kind of practice you should be striving for. So when somebody is out here throwing around the words cultural appropriation, look deeper into the reason why. Understand what it means. And understand the historical concepts behind it. So if somebody's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, that's appropriation. Well, okay. Look into why. And maybe you can help somebody further down the line go, oh, hey, like, did you know that this is associated with this and we probably shouldn't be doing it? Because they may not actually know. Don't shame somebody for it. Educate them and educate yourself, because that's the only way that we keep ethnic cultures alive for so many people who have fought so hard to keep from being erased. We keep them alive by appreciating them. So that's our episode. That's our lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you are somebody who is not in the Discord and you would like to follow the tempering path, because this is a lesson in the tempering path, come join the Discord. There is a link in the show description. If you are also somebody who is a member of the Discord and has participated in lots of our loving events and wonderful, cool stuff that we do over there, and you actually want to help support the temple, there is a link in the show description to the temple Ko-fi page where you can get full, complete, unedited Deity of the Month documents. You get all of our bonus audios, all the stuff that we do, bonus rituals, meditations, bonus episodes, all sorts of really cool stuff. So if that's something that you want to do and you would really like to help support us in that regard and you want to have access to all that really cool stuff, you can. It is not anything that you have to do. If you're somebody that's like, I just want to do the tempering path, that is still not anything that's paid for. You just come and join the Discord, hang out with us, learn from us, and hang out with us as we're weirdos, because we are. That's who we are on a daily
Yeah.
basis. So come hang out with us. It's a good time always over there. We would love to have you. And if you join the Discord and you're like, hey, I have a question about something, ask the witches. We will happily answer for you. So everyone, take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other in this crazy world. Drink your water. Take your meds. Do all the good things and have good mental health days, because we all need them in this crazy, crazy world. And we will see you next time for another episode. Bye-bye, everyone.